now, so I thought it will be an easy thing, so I'll just reproduce my paper, and from 2009 it will be, and I'll be ready. But actually, when I started looking at the data a bit more in detail again, so I realized that it can be improved. So many of the details and the general conclusion remains valid. So from the paper, so I don't know how many of you have read it. But some of the important details have changed in the meantime. So when we look at the interrogative question words in Bantu, so we are struck by the bewildering formal variation of question words. So when you look at the, for instance, Bastin et al.'s database in 1999. For question words, you'll see it for yourself. So you see there is a multitude of seemingly related forms and forms that do not seem to have anything in common. There are often irregular correspondences between seemingly related forms. The forms they range from very short to relatively long. We can have in Mongo something like e for what, whereas in Mwani we have for what we have kinani. And in this respect, question words in Bantu resemble various dative forms, such as personal indexes, substantives, and possessives, and demonstratives, rather than nouns and verbs. So there are different ways to go about such wild variation reconstructions. So the first possibility is that we can reconstruct a smaller range of more common formal types. So it's basically what Guthrie did. So we have so that's basically what Guthrie did. So here are the common Bantu forms for question words that we find in Guthrie's work. So what, who, which, where, how many. So you see there are often many different stems for common Bantu. And so when we look at them in these forms, we already noticed there are certain interesting details. There are certain recurrent patterns in these forms. So first we see that Yani appears both as who and what. The same form ni appears as which and marginally what. It's especially similar to the last syllable of Yani. Then we have pe, which appears as where and which in these common Bantu forms. So another possibility is to reconstruct the simplest possible form. So this is a much more radical way of reducing the observed duration. So just basically pick one of these formal types and use it. Propose that this is the reconstruction. So this is more like what Bantu grammatical reconstruction by Meyerson looks like. So have a set which looks like a fragmentary system of interrogative nouns with stem E, so class 7, 16, 17, 18, and so on. But we have this strange form Ndai or Nai, which is translated as who and which looks a bit unusual. So there are two things here. First is that E what is reconstructed as a nominal stem with a nominal prefix. And another thing is that we have this stem who. So there's also some additions from later reconstructions by Schallenberg and BLR, so which added here. So we have these very weird forms. So if we have variants like Dani, Nai, Ndai, and so on, it's Nani, and so on. So a nominal stem with unusual form and high formal variability. Whose reconstruction to Proto-Bantu is rather problematic. So another possibility is to reconstruct the common denominator of all the variations, which usually would give us longer forms than shorter forms. So there is no example of such reconstruction for question words, but there is such type of reconstruction for personal indexes such as substantives and possessive by Kamba-Muzenga. So we see there is like this common denominator in the beginning, and then things just drop off. In some languages they lose some parts, and then you can get the very short form, you can get intermediate forms, and you can get very long forms. So all these different approaches have their raison d'être. And so there is some rationality why you would do that. But I believe that we can also enhance the reconstruction if we try to make a reconstruction informed by what we know about diachronic typology. So we try to achieve a close match between the observed duration, the reflexes of the element in question, and the typological knowledge of common process of change that may provide some cues as to what historical sources may have produced the observed variation. So I have done some work on diachronic typology of interrogative pronominals myself. So this is my PhD in 2007. So I also organized a workshop at the International Conference of Linguistics 2011 on the stability of NIP. So it stands for non-selective interrogative pronominals, words like who and what, opposed to selective ones as which one. So this would be selective. Okay. So and one important thing about question words that diachronically, so that we can establish that they tend to be diachronic and stable and structurally complex. So they're polymorphemic, they tend to be polymorphemic constructions. So this is a result of interaction of two diachronic tendencies which work in the opposite direction. So the first one is a strong predilection for substance accretion, first unbound, later bound, so which can be described as univariation, and which is related to prominent information structural status of question words and to very strong tendency for continuity in the evolution of question words. So which basically means that question words are not invented, are very extremely rarely invented from scratch. So they're more like royalties. So to be a royalty, you need to be, your parents need to be royalties as well. So that's the continuity in the evolution of question words. So this is the first tendency, and the second tendency, which works in the opposite direction, is the strong predilection for substance reduction, often irregular and radical, related to frequency affects affecting functional words, frequent functional words, which is also well known. So, and for reconstruction that can have different consequences. So sometimes reconstruction can be easy, but it's usually these ease is apparent rather than real. And then we have difficulty, which is real. So of reconstructing question words, and it largely depends on where accretion and reduction of substance in question words happens vis-a-vis each other. So we can have different cases. So the first one would be something like that. So we have accretion and reduction occur at the same side of question words, which results in kind of so AAA. So the first one is the, let's suppose that's the historical question word. And because the accretion and reduction occur at the same side, so the something of the original form always remains there. And so this an example of this is, for instance, Proto-Indo-European interrogative, what they call stem, but so Proto-Indo-European is often, Indo-European languages are often cited as examples of the stability of question words, which is actually misleading because what is stable is just the first segment, so that's what remains there. But you constantly add and delete things, and then you can reconstruct the first segment, but you can't reconstruct really what the question word was. These questions was. So another possible situation which presents real difficulty for reconstruction of is when we have accretion and reduction occur at the opposite sides of question words. So these and these elements. So A, it can be. Oh, sorry. This should be. So there is a mistake here in this part. So, but the idea is that the A can get trapped inside, and it's no, that's not. There's no mistake. So you have accretion. So you have accretion at the right here, for instance, and reduction at the left. So at the end, so you start from AAA, and then you end at BCC, where there is no trace of A left. So Bantu is kind of in that direction, but not as much. So there is a nice example of such radical such changes. It's found in Eastern Maya languages. So we already had Mayan Bantu connection in Savastok. So it's coming up again. Just to give you an example, so that we're not that bad off in Bantu as it could be. So, an example from Mayan languages. So, Mayan language is actually much more, is a relatively shallow family. So, and the phenomenon that we, this kind of phenomenon we find, it's only one branch, Eastern Mayan, which is a very, very shallow linguistic, has very shallow time depth. So, but the interrogative pronominals are extremely diverse. So, we have in different languages of the same branch. So, we have forms for who, which can vary from alke, il, nach, etc. Then we can have different dialects of a single language. We have, for instance, for interrogatives such as with, what, how, in the dialects of Kicche, can have such three different, widely different forms, has, su, and wach. They're all related, but I mean, they look completely different even in one dialect. And we can also have an extreme situation within one dialect of a single language. We have forms for who, for instance, in Kuburko Kicche, like Chinok, China, Na, and Pa, so which are all related, but they look wildly different. So in Bantu, we're not that bad. So in Bantu, what happens, my impression is that we have accretion on the side versus reduction inside of question words, so which does pose a difficulty in construction. So this is more or less what we find in Bantu, but with a slight preference for accretion at the right, and some reduction also happens at the left. So the situation is not that bad. So there is, and also in cases like mine, for instance, in Bantu, so which also helps if we have enough languages, enough Dot languages, and enough variation preserved in these Dot languages. So we usually can do a reconstruction. So it's not obvious, but we can do it because there is the variation, these correspondences, these irregularities and oddities of the system. They allow us to reconstruct the system. Ideally. Okay, so when we look at the diachronic typology of question words, so the first thing that I would like to present is the types of accretion. So what things can be, what kind of material can be accreted. So it's various types of datics, demonstrative personal pronominals, focus markers, copulars, relativizers, nouns with generic semantics like thing, person, place, name, etc. You can have gender, noun, class, or in Bantu's tradition they're usually called noun class markers. We have nominalizers such as one and which one in English. They have augment in Bantu and things like that. Okay. So there are also certain regularities, semantic changes with respect to question words. So here I'll focus on especially on non-selective interrogative pronominals such as who and what. And so these semantic changes is important is the changes that happen without taking into account the specifics of gender number semantics, semantics that is possible in a system. So if you have like masculine gender, feminine gender, or human gender, whatever, so this adds some complexity. So this is semantic change just if you have a plain form who and a plain form what. You have just form where to and the form what, so things like that. So with no additional material. So one of the common types is when you have a change from beware to which one and then which, be which one and then which one. So which one to who and occasionally who what. You have who to who, a form that means both who and what can develop to who or what when a new dedicated form of earlier non-selective interrogative of either non-selective interrogative pronominal emerges. We can also have a development style like this. Beware will develop into a modifier what and what noun, what kind of noun, which noun, what then another type of development, what kind of noun can develop into a selective modifier, which noun, and which as a modifier can develop, it can be nominalized and become a pronominal which one. So we can also have a change what kind of and as a modifier will become a what as a non-selective interrogative pronominal, and also who, but usually only for classification rather than identification. So I just want to explain what I mean by this. In English, you would usually use what for these kind of questions. So it's like, for instance, what is he to you, or what did she give birth to? So a boy or a girl, what is he to you? He's my brother, things like that. So in English, you would usually use what, but in many other languages, you would use who, because it's a question about a person. So that's why I just said who, classification rather than identification. So in English it would be just one, what. But what about things and what about persons? Okay. So then another type of, we can have constructions based on noun, meaning name of verbs naming do, say, be, name, call, etc. that can develop into interrogative pronominals who, what, or a pronominal that means both who and what. So then if we add peculiarities of the gender number system in languages that mark gender noun classes in Bantu, so we can have developments like who, what and who what. So for instance, the example from Lithuanian, we have word like kas, which means who, both who and what. So which just a historical accident, because this is an originally masculine form of the interrogative, and the neuter form was used for what, but masculine and neuter merged in Lithuanian, so the result is that you have who and what. So that's just the historical accident. So common types of semantic changes, they continue. So an important point about these changes is that who cannot directly change to what or vice versa. So without these additional like gender semantics or other specific conditioning. So such a shift can also not be counted, cannot be counted by any type of regular semantic change either. So it means like metaphor, metonymy, and things like that. So this is not possible. Okay. So then reduction, so due to frequency, affix is largely irregular, and it's language and word form specific. So you can drop a morpheme, you can drop a segment or segments here and there. So just here is a nice example from a language which may be kind of understandable to most of you, Louisiana Creole, so it comes from French. So in French you can have, in colloquial French you can have constructions something like c'est qui ça qui a fait ça. So it's not really standard French, but it's kind of French-like. So, and in Louisiana Creole you have the word which means who and what, which can be realized as qui ça qui, ça qui, and ça. So in the end, so in the ultimate, these end results, ça, what the situation you have that from French, this the word ça, which means this or that, you end up in an interrogative meaning who or what. So, but it didn't happen like out of the blue. So it happened in this specific particular construction by reduction of these elements. So, and all these forms are attested, are used in Louisiana Creole. So, but the result is funny. So, if we don't have the duration, it's difficult to reconstruct cases like that. So, but there is one common type, relatively common type of reduction with interrogative forms, is what I can call cosa type reduction. So basically endocentric compound reduction. So in Italian you have cosa, which means what, and you also have che cosa, what thing. So that cosa comes from che cosa, so by reducing the modifier che. So it's something like unions, when you use unions to instead of trade unions, to mean trade unions. Okay. So okay. So after this lengthy but necessary introduction, I'll go over to Bantu data, and I will first look at some telling oddities of the system. So because the oddities of the system, the strangeness of the systems are irregularities. They are kind of the window that helps us to reconstruct the proto-system. So this is the variation and the details that are necessary to reconstruct, that help us to reconstruct things. So one of the first thing is that you find a lack of differentiation between who and what in a number of Zone C languages with what we can say, what we can reconstruct, what we can describe as a reflex of this form that was reconstructed by Meus and Dani and Dai. So there are like 5. So this the first 2. There's Mboshi, then there's with some dialects of Titela, and the last 3 varieties there are they make part of Mongol dialect clusters, so which and Hildstad's description is Mongols. So then another type of oddity is that we find these kind of reflexes of Fundani as who, but also as a modifier what kind of which, and also with things, not with persons as well. So for instance, in Kimombo we find nani as who, but we also find kiuma nani, what, literally what thing. So then in Dhaka we have ani who and imane what, which is basically a kind of reduction of the kiuma nani situation. So in Basa we have nje, onje, who, and it can also be used when it's marked by an agreement prefix. It can also be used as what kind of what noun, also about things, not only about persons. Then we have a kind of situation which is a bit different, so it's a comparison between different languages. We have in C31 languages we have ya, which means who, And in Mongo we have ya, which is with an agreement prefix, which is a modifier what kind of and which and. So this kind of slightly different variant of this situation. So then we also find reflexes of Dani as who, what kind of which one, but also as what and how. For instance, in Tswana we have a form mang who, which is also can be used what or how in the construction. It is called what or how, and it also can be used as a modifier, what kind of what noun, thing, person. But importantly, it's not used selectively. It's not used as which noun. So here's an example. So what is this place called? It's literally something like who is this place called? So it's a question, not about the question about the name of the person, but about the name of the place. And so we have to use this form that is elsewhere used as who. Okay. So another example is from Kagulu. So in G12 language, we have ni, clitic ni, what means what and how, and so which replaces the older form ki for what, and it comes from the form interrogative for where, ani, marked with noun class prefix. Another oddity is that we have some kind of these reflexes from Dani as be what about name of a personal thing. So again in Tswana, the same form man who, you can also ask the question, what is the name of this tree? Literally, the name of this tree is who. So this is a possibility. And a kind of a bit even more extreme example where even not the word for name is there. So in Ngombe, C-zone language, you have a question like, what is the name of this village? Which is literally, who is this village? So it's the same as who is this man. So you have the same interrogative and the same construction. So the first implication of all these oddities that I've just presented is that they suggest that these form ndani can be derived from an earlier which or which one, and ultimately where in some languages perhaps from where how, but not from who or. So that means that if this form should be reconstructed, its meaning cannot be who or what, but it should be which one or and ultimately where. So another implication is that we cannot reconstruct no question word for who for Proto-Bantu, so as one single stem or as one single item. So another some oddity of Bantu languages have made in quite a few of them, non-selective interrogative pronominal question subjects have to be framed as nominal predicates, often as the construction looks like. You have the relative clause, then you have optional obligatory copula, and you have a non-selective interrogative pronominal. And they cannot be controllers of the agreement. So this is, for instance, again, what we find with Tswana mang, who, what kind of, and what, how, and Mongo na, who, and what. So what this suggests is that it is likely that these ndani is to originate in a predicative clausal construction rather than nominal. So this is not, nothing is like a strong knockout argument, but this is kind of implications that suggest themselves when you observe these evidence. So another strange thing, so I found it in only one language, but I actually haven't looked for it, so it may be a bit more widespread than that. So the reflexes of E, what as where, so without the locative plus marker. So for instance, in Mongo, you have E, which means we can mean what, and where with verbs that have a locative argument. So where has he gone is like literally he went, and then the same form as what. Okay, so the possible implication of this is that the original meaning of this root that was reconstructed as what is maybe where or how. So this is not. So this is a possible implication of that, because otherwise it's kind of difficult to conceive the change from what to where would be typologically very unusual. So just if you don't add any other extra material like a locative marker or preposition or whatever, so this would be very strange. So another oddity is that there are some, especially many cases where there are no traces of the low tone of the presumed nominal prefixes in reflexes of E. So sorry, there's a mistake on the slide. Like for instance, Mongo E. There are quite a few cases like that, so which may suggest that the original class prefix of E, in the meaning what is probably not, it's probably a high tone prefix from the from the paradigm of pronominal prefixes, that is KE, rather than what the in Bantu grammatical reconstruction uses the nominal prefix K with a low tone, which would be typical for deixic nominals and relative clauses, the latter and originally probably also the former being basic nominalizations used as modifiers and nominals. So here again, the interrogative words, they pattern with deictics, with clausal predicate, with clausal predicative constructions, rather than with pure nominal stems. And so another peculiarity is that reflexes of Ndani, for instance, translated, reconstructed as who, often do not have a class 1 prefix, so either nominal prefix or pronominal prefix. So in this sense, they resemble nouns of class 1a, which Mark in his 2006 paper called genderless nouns. And since often reflexes of this form cannot be controllers of agreement, so as I said, for instance, when they question subjects, they need to be constructed as nominal predicates, so there is no construction where they control agreement. That means that actually we cannot know their class either, or their gender, so either. So these are forms of which we cannot know the gender by definition. So now, okay. So and to this we can recall one of the implications that I just already mentioned, that the Ndani is likely to originate in predicative clausal construction, which kind of squares rather well with this observation. So now to some typological trivialities that we also find in Bantu. So Bantu languages are human languages, so after all, so there are also trivial things that happen there. So like development from which one to who, described by Deneuve for zone J languages. So you find it elsewhere, but it's one of the published accounts of this kind of phenomenon. Then from beware to which one. So in Mongo, for instance, the interrogative which one, or what, which noun is literally it is he, they, it is he, she, they, etc. Who is where. So it's the copula, the green prefix copula, then where. And then we can have a development from beware to which one and who on the one hand, and from beware to what kind of which noun, and then to what and how. So here's an example from a very nice example from Kagulu, G12 language. So where the word for where is hoki or ihoki, replacing an older form ani, which means where, and which is still used, but it's the more common one is ihoki. So and it's also used as a selective interrogative with an agreement. If you add an class prefix, you get which one, what, or which noun. And when you use class 1, subject mark is not pronominal prefixes, so you get forms like yehoki who and wohoki who. And it's important to notice here that these forms, it's only in this class 1 that the form is used as non-selective, so like who. And whereas in other classes it used selectively, it uses means which thing, I mean which tree, whatever, so which something. So which can compare to the form for what. You have which is now what or how, and which is a clitic ni, and so which usually is preceded by which can be added to the verb, or if it needs to be used normally. So we have an agreement prefix, a demonstrative root o, and then this clitic. So for instance, the default question word for what would be choni, then joni if it's about something said. And it replaces an older form ki, which is also still present in the language. So again, some trivialities. There is a regular reduction here and there, actually quite a lot of it. So there is also kosa type reduction. So for instance, if we compare kikuya forms for what like kima, or fumu forms for what like ima, and then the forms that were already seen from ene kibombo forms, so what would literally mean what thing. So you see the obvious similarities in how these causal type reduction as proceeded here. You can also have accretion by deictics, augment, copulus, reduplication, etc. So some examples from the Neo describes the accretion of where interrogatives in zone J languages by reduplication or addition of initial ka and final na. In Enya Kibombo, so we have the word for what is reduplication, obviously ki. And in Kagulu, so the formula is seen, so we have this demonstrative or demonstrative root which is added to the interrogative. Then we compare forms like bila, eke, and for what and como, eke and do, so it also means what, with the accretion at the right side. And so yeah, also we have augment of predicative, maybe predicative e, so when we compare forms like hunde, inde, and in the plural it will be bende or bande, so there should be an e there to get this, to give this e in bende. Okay, so okay. Continue with accretion. So one of the very common types of accreted element at the right side is the form which looks like ndi or ne. So we have, for instance, for where, who interrogative. So we have yeah, so it was here. So we have dual forms weni, for instance, it can be we or ni, weni, punu, va or vani. So, and then luba, paini, beni, so meaning where, treating the form pai, so class 16, and the root that is reconstructed as what. Songo, kasenge forms like nain, de, who, and then nani, what, and any amanda, kuma, nani, can so say ni, that is added. So, and this ndi on de, it's strikingly similar to a class 1 pronominal stem, one of the class 1 pronominal stems reconstructed by Kamba Muzenga, and so also again we see the same kind of uncertainty about its vowel. So at a certain point Kamba Muzenga asks himself, so what is actually form de on d? So the final reconstruction he retains only one form de, but at a certain point apparently he was doubting, and so here we find the same kind of variation. So it is also very similar to presentative or existential copula, nominal predictive marker. Ndinde or nine, things like that. So, so historically the two are most likely related. It's a typical typological development will be from typical development will be from a deictic to a copula, which won't be unusual. And so one of the preliminary conclusions says the Bantu grammatical reconstruction form ndai or nai is closer to the protoform than the other form that was proposed by Meyerson as well as possible alternative, ndani with a ni at the end. So it's probably this ni is most likely been created later. Sorry. So here's just a summary of the indications that we've already seen. The form, so ndai is from earlier which one and ultimately where. No interrogative pronominal who can be reconstructed for Proto-Bantu is likely, ndai is likely to originate in a predicative clausal construction. The original meaning of e, what is probably be, where, how, and so the original class prefix of e in the construction meaning what is probably a high tone prefix from the pronominal paradigm rather than the nominal prefix, and finally this common accreted element ndinde is probably a class 1 pronominal stem or representative copula. Okay, so now getting to the reconstruction I proposed in my paper. So it looked something, it looked something like that. So it was a construction. It is where. So this is the structure and the form. One of the kind of criticism that I got from the reviewers, and some of the reviewers are probably present here, is that there is some kind of irregularity of the reflexes of p in the pi part of the construction, so which could be, it can be counted by irregularity of the reduction following the innovation of the construction, but I understand that it's not really satisfactory. So, and if we can find a better solution, we probably should go with this better solution than using pi. So another kind of problem, I mean, not a strong problem, but a kind of something troubling that was there is that the palatalization, frication, subsequent assimilation of many of the reflexes of D in this construction, they can be counted in principle by the A or E that follows. But the count is not completely satisfying because we have phones like Mongo, Ya, where you don't have these coronal D. So if you presume that the original construction was a copular construction, so and then there was a copular loss, so D just dropped, then it's kind of so then the question is where did these Y came from? So it's kind of problem. Okay. So here is an update on the reconstruction. So it's still, so as you see, basically it's still, the idea is still the same. So it's a clausal construction, which is basically means it is where, it is which one, but the details have slightly, but the deal has changed. So it is, the construction means something, it is the one which is where, literally it is that, she, he, or it is where, person or thing, so it doesn't matter whether it's a person or thing. So now a few things about this construction. The first element, E and E, I put it in the brackets because I'm not sure whether, it probably should be reconstructed, but it's, I'm not sure whether it was optional originally or it was dropped later. So as to its morphological identity, so it may be, it is clearly some kind of dative or expletive with expletive function. So maybe agreement pattern 9 or prefix of class 9 or maybe 24 that was reconstructed by Mason only for the pronominal prefix, and it's as nominal prefix and pronominal prefix with the unclear quality of the vowel, so it's some kind of front vowel. Okay, it can also be the same E or E that is reconstructed by Kamba-Muzenga as one of the first vowel morphemes in the template for pronominals for substitutives. So there is this A-E, and then there is a pronominal stem, then there is the demonstrative stem. So this is maybe also the same, they may be all the same elements. So the D here in the agreement pattern 9D, so the second element, it stands for, the third one, not the second. So it stands for demonstrative, so it's the same as the pronominal prefix. So there are some cases of this reflex of this word who, where you find a kind of a labelization or a label, so but they're probably a later innovation. It's a later innovation. I don't think that you need to reconstruct agreement prefix 1 here, U, in this construction. So a small thing which is not crucial for this reconstruction, but which I believe is relevant in general, is that I think that the tone of the subject marker of agreement 1 is probably low rather than high as reconstructed by Mason, but it's not crucial for this particular reconstruction. And then this last element is ye, B, where, so which is corresponds to Mason's reconstruction, Biller reconstruction, E, what. There are okay, so there is little evidence for this initially here in Bantu itself. So there is kind of something that I'm not sure how to interpret because I haven't looked at the grammars of the respective languages. So to know whether this here that appears there sometimes is a high-test resolution, or it's maybe just reflex of this original of this earlier year, this palatal approximate. Okay, so this construction was not restricted in its use to questions about humans. It can also be used about things. And so the important thing here is that agreement patterns of +1, 9, and 1 are not in common in Bantu as default agreement patterns. So they are not, as agreement patterns, they are not restricted to agreement with human controls. So it can be also things or idiophones or whatever, so, which is relevant here. So, and then continuing on the formal part, so Mark and I have worked on Bula last year at Jarau and Bantu language, and so there, I mean, this form we have she is he or it is where is aye, so versus he is well says awa, and so when you ask about nominal subject, not a pronominal subject, you have where is x, you have the structure is x, then copular na, then you have this ye, where. So na is also a copular. So that's also where actually I get the idea for this reconstruction of ye as beware with initial palatal approximant. Okay. Thank you for your attention.
We have some 5 minutes for questions before the meeting.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry for my voice. Thank you for this fascinating talk. I think that you just nailed the missing reconstruction, one of the missing reconstructions in current BLR3. So if I go to your slide number, the one that says lack of differentiation between who and what,
Which one exactly?
you say that there is in some languages of Zone C, the sport that
Yes,
I understand, you put a little superscript circle because you didn't find a reconstruction for it. Is that right?
This.
Is that why Ndani doesn't have the asterisk, but?
Yes, yeah. I put a circle because it's not certainly it's not reconstructed to Proto-Bantu by BLR with certainty.
Yes.
It's found the BLR cites only 3 zones. G.
Yeah, so thanks for an interesting talk. So I just want to make sure I followed right through to the end. There was a lot of information. Yeah, so it looked, if I understood right at the end, your proposal is that all of the question words have an incorporated copula. But that's how you reconstruct them?
Not all of them, the ones that are kind of reconstructed to these Ndai and Dani by BLR.
Right, so I mean, so what's interesting about that, if I understand your proposal, is when you say that this means that the questions were in a causal construction, a cleft-like causal construction, so would you also reconstruct that to Proto-Bantu for the structure of questions, or?
Well, I'm not sure, I don't know, but it's, I don't know. I mean, the thing that you can kind of deduce from this reconstruction, if you accept it, looks like a kind of this cleft with the relative clause that follows, and one thing is that the subject precedes the predicate in the relative clause. So one of the things, the a precedes here. So it is one of the small things, and also that that you have this relativizer or demonstrative of gender 9 that is used there, and then you have the subject, what is now a subject prefix, but it's probably not, it was not prefixed at that stage. So this is the things that you can deduce from this reconstruction. But I would not dare say that all other questions, that was kind of the general strategy for questioning everything, so I don't know. So that's the only thing that I can reconstruct. So maybe there were also other question words that were lost. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Can I just ask about key?
Yes.
I mean, are you saying that there is a key form in Proto-Bantu or not?
Sorry, say again?
Key.
Yes, what about it?
Yes, are you saying there was a reconstructible question word for key in Proto-Bantu or not?
Key, like in French key, or in key?
Or what? Standing for what? The question word?
I don't think so. I mean, at least that's not. I'm not very. How to say? I'm not very. Don't have a very strong opinion about that. But I think that what is reconstructed as e, the stem e, what is rather a locative stem beware, or maybe which one. So and you can assume that if you mark it with the class 7 prefix, that it would mean what. So which one thing? So basically.
Well, the reason I ask is you certainly find keys scattered across Nigeria in quite a variety of languages, as if it should be there.
Yes, I mean, why not? I mean, just if the element, this first element, the so-called class prefix or gender mark, it was present in languages, and the original question word was also present in languages. So, yeah, why not?
Yes.
So there's nothing spectacular about that.
Okay.
Isn't that the area where the K would become 0?
Sir?
I mean, where you have the E, and would that be, you think it's cognate with Renault Congo key?
Yes.
But it could be sort of in the northwest, that is where the the direct reflexes, then the K is dropped, and the other K that you find would be the class 7 added or something like that?
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
we
agnostic,
have
yeah.
strong opinions about that.
But why is it verbal there, the E? Do you reconstruct the verb to be where?
It's a predicate. I mean, it's like a stated verb. You can say it's comparable to what we have in Bula.
Is
Yeah,
there
beware
a
is
verb
she.
to be somewhere, a locative verb to be of that shape attested somewhere?
So
Outside the where it's been reconstructed?
No, I mean, there should be,
Question
as I said, so the question words, they show a strong continuity in the evolution, so there should be a question word somewhere inside. So in this reconstruction, so you cannot just dispense with it, or
Because it doesn't
Yeah,
ambiguity
misunderstanding.
about the gloss. If people put the question mark in the gloss line, then you never know whether that's
I
meaning
mean,
of that
between the
morpheme or whether
brackets?
they mark the sentence. I never
Which
put
one?
it in the gloss line, the question
Which
mark.
one?
Unless
This
there's a
one?
question morpheme.
yeah, and it was interrogative. Yeah, and the beware, the question mark after beware,
Yeah.
yes, it's an interrogative. So it's that the question mark means that it's interrogative. It's not a relative or whatever. So because in English,
Not the sentence, but the this particular formative.
it's an interrogative,
It's an
interrogative morpheme.
formative. Okay.
That's just the convention.
The final one was
But to that case, actually, it can be more complex because there are some languages where you have a verb which actually means to be somewhere, and depending on the prosody of the sentence. So if you have question prosody with such a verb, this is how you get some. No, in quite some languages. So. So in this sense, you don't necessarily need a question morpheme, but if you have the right prosody with a non-interrogative verb of that type, you get this, and eventually, of course, it can conventionalize with this
what you have
interrogative meaning.
in languages, it's common in Australian languages, so you have the same form for indefinites and interrogatives, so they call them ignoratives. Something like somewhere and where.
Yes, and then, yes, exactly.
okay. Okay, so thanks again, and we have the